The weather's closing in on us here. It's been snowing a little bit. It's been cold. You know, it's that end of season push. And everybody's doing a really good job.
Season 16 pushed Parker Schnabel's crew to their absolute limit. Brutal hours, frozen ground, and machines that refused to cooperate. Yet when payday finally arrived, the numbers told a story nobody saw coming. Could a season that felt like a disaster actually make these miners rich? And what secret income stream changed everything? Join us as we reveal the shocking truth behind the Paychecks. The season that started with big expectations. There is something about the Klondike that gets into a person's blood. The wide-open wilderness, the roar of heavy machinery, the glint of gold catching the light inside a sluice box, it pulls people back year after year, no matter how brutal the previous season was. And for Parker Schnabel, one of the most recognized names in modern gold mining, the pull is stronger than most. When Parker arrived in the Yukon ahead of what would become one of his most talked-about seasons, the mood inside the camp was cautiously optimistic. The ground had been scouted. The equipment had been serviced over the winter months. The crew, a mix of returning veterans and a handful of new faces, was ready to get to work. Everything pointed toward a clean, productive run. Then Parker announced the goal, and optimism gave way to something closer to pressure. 10,000 ounces of gold. That was the number he put in front of his team, a target that would have set a new personal record and delivered a fortune that even seasoned miners rarely see in a single season. It was bold, almost reckless, but Parker had never been the type to aim low. The crew took it seriously. The wash plant was fired up. The excavators began tearing into the hillsides. Dirt moved in enormous quantities from the very first days, and the early gold counts gave people reason to believe the target might actually be within reach. There was energy in the camp that is hard to manufacture, the kind that only comes when a team genuinely believes it can achieve something remarkable. But the Klondike has never cared much for plans. The Yukon wilderness operates on its own schedule, answering to no target, no timeline, and no ambition. What looked like a promising setup was about to be tested in ways the crew had not fully prepared for. The season was just getting started, and already the land was preparing to fight back, and what it had waiting would push Parker's operation to the absolute limit. Nature turns against the mine. The first warning signs came quietly. A drop in temperature that arrived weeks earlier than the historical averages suggested. Ground that should have been soft and workable was still gripping the frost deep inside its layers. The Klondike permafrost, one of the most stubborn geological forces on Earth, had not released its hold the way Parker's team had counted on. Permafrost is not simply frozen ground. It is ground that has been locked in ice for potentially thousands of years, compressed and dense in ways that make conventional mining equipment work twice as hard for half the result. When the thaw comes late, entire sections of a mining claim can become virtually unworkable, and no amount of machinery or manpower can speed up what the Earth refuses to give. Parker's excavators hit those walls repeatedly. What should have been hours of steady digging turned into grinding, shuddering battles against material that refused to yield. Excavator teeth, hardened steel designed to tear through soil and loose rock, snapped under the pressure. Replacements had to be sourced, fitted, and put back into service as quickly as possible, but every delay had a cost. Every hour the machine sat idle was an hour the wash plant ran dry, and an idle wash plant is essentially a machine burning money without producing a single ounce of gold. The breakdowns began to pile up. Hydraulic lines failed. Motors overheated from the constant strain. The maintenance crew worked through their own exhausting hours just to keep everything moving, and still the equipment found new ways to slow the operation down. The relentless cycle of dig, break, repair, and dig again became the rhythm of the season before summer had even properly arrived. Weather and geology are two forces no mining operation can budget for with any real accuracy. Parker had built his targets on projections that assumed reasonably cooperative ground conditions. What he got instead was a reminder that the Klondike makes no promises to anyone. The crew had not yet broken, but the physical toll was already beginning to show, and the human cost of this brutal season was only just beginning to climb. A crew pushed to the edge. A gold mining season in the Yukon is never comfortable. Anyone who signs up for it understands that going in, the remote location, the unforgiving terrain, the round-the-clock pressure to move as much dirt as possible before the freeze returns, these are not secrets. But there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and living it hour by hour, day after day, with no real way out until the season ends.
We got a mountain of mud to move. If we don't do something about it and get on it and stay on it, we're certainly not going to be sluicing this.
By the time the equipment problems and the stubborn ground had fully set the tone for the season, Parker's crew was already deep inside a grind that left little room for rest. 16-hour shifts became the standard. Not occasionally, not during peak pushes, but consistently, across most of the working week. When those hours were added up, many members of the crew were pushing somewhere close to 75 hours of physical labor every 7 days. The physical environment made every one of those hours harder than it sounds. Freezing mud coated everything and everyone. Temperatures in the Yukon can swing dramatically, even during the summer mining window. And cold, wet conditions on top of exhausting shift work break down the body faster than almost any other environment outside of a military setting. Boots soaked through, hands cracked and bled. Sleep, when it came, was deep but never long enough. Parker felt the pressure acutely, and that pressure moved downhill through the camp. When the gold totals came in below expectation at the end of each week, conversations grew shorter and more intense. The crew understood what the numbers meant. They understood what Parker had put on the line, and most of them genuinely wanted to deliver. But wanting to produce more gold and having the physical and mechanical means to do it are two very different things, and the gap between those two realities was widening. Despite everything, the crew held together. There were no mass walkouts, no dramatic collapses, just tired people doing a brutal job in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. But the question no one was asking out loud yet was the one that mattered most. If the gold was not coming, what exactly were they all working toward? When the goal became impossible. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a mining camp when the numbers stop adding up. It is not the silence of rest or of peace, it is the silence of people doing the mental arithmetic and arriving at conclusions nobody wants to say out loud. That silence had begun to settle over Parker's operation, and everyone in the camp could feel it. The deeper the excavators pushed into the ground, the clearer the picture became. The gold was not distributed the way the preseason surveys had suggested. Pockets that should have been rich were coming up thin. Entire sections of the claim that had looked promising on paper were delivering almost nothing when the dirt finally ran through the wash plant. The Earth had its own plan, and it bore very little resemblance to Parker's spreadsheets. The first target revision came without fanfare. 10,000 ounces became 8,000. Parker announced the adjustment with the directness that has always defined his approach. No dramatic speech, no attempt to soften the blow. The number had changed because reality had changed, and pretending otherwise would have helped nobody. The crew absorbed the new figure and kept working. But 8,000 began to look just as unreachable as 10,000 had. The machines were still fighting the ground.
This shaft should be rotating. There's a drive motor on the other side. It's not rotating at the minute.
The hours were still brutal. The gold was still coming in below the pace required to hit even the revised target. What had started as an ambitious but believable goal had quietly become something that felt more like a ceiling than a floor. Morale is a fragile thing on a remote mining claim. It does not collapse suddenly or dramatically, it erodes slowly, one disappointing weigh-in at a time, one long shift after another, with nothing new to show for it. The crew kept showing up, kept doing the work, but the energy that had defined the early weeks of the season was harder to find now. The season was slipping away, and everyone knew it. The only question left was how far short of the mark they would land, and whether the final number would feel like a result or a defeat. The final gold weigh-in. Every mining season in the Klondike ends the same way, regardless of how the months before it played out. The machines go quiet, the wash plant shuts down, the mud-covered crew gathers together, and whatever the ground gave up over those months gets put on a scale. There is no negotiating with that number. It is simply what it is. When Parker's team gathered for the final weigh-in, the atmosphere was heavy with the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond the physical. These were people who had given the season everything they had, through the broken equipment, the permafrost battles, the endless shifts, and the steady erosion of the targets they had started with. Whatever the scale showed, it would represent months of genuine sacrifice. The final count landed at 6,837 ounces of gold. Not 10,000, not 8,000. 6,837. Converted into dollars at the prevailing gold price, that total was worth roughly $18 million. By almost any reasonable standard applied outside the mining world, $18 million worth of gold pulled from the ground in a single season is an extraordinary result. It represents an enormous amount of work, risk, and investment paying off in the most tangible way imaginable. But Parker did not measure it against reasonable outside standards. He measured it against 10,000 ounces, and then against 8,000. And both of those comparisons told the same story. The season had fallen short. By Parker's own internal accounting, it was a failure, and no dollar figure attached to the gold was going to change that conclusion in his mind. That tension between what the numbers objectively represented and how they felt to the people most responsible for them sat at the center of everything that followed. Parker had built his reputation on pushing harder and delivering more than anyone expected. Falling short of his own targets, regardless of the reason, sat uncomfortably against that identity. The gold had been weighed. The season was officially over. But the full story of what the operation had actually produced was only just beginning to come into focus. The paychecks tell a different story. While Parker was processing the gap between his ambitions and the final gold total, something quieter but equally significant was playing out across the rest of the camp. The crew, who had just survived one of the most grueling seasons in recent memory, were looking at their own financial picture, and what they were seeing looked very different from failure. Gold mining is one of the few industries left where the combination of remote location, physical hardship, and specialized skill can translate into genuinely life-changing wages for workers who are not at the top of the operation. The Klondike is not an easy place to work, but it compensates accordingly for those willing to endure it. Entry-level miners on Parker's crew earn somewhere in the region of $28 per hour. That figure might not sound extraordinary on its own, but the context surrounding it transforms the number entirely. These workers are on site for a full mining season, working shifts that regularly stretch well beyond the standard 8 hours, and overtime rates apply to every extra hour logged. When the total is calculated across a 6-month season, an entry-level miner can walk away with approximately $65,000 in earnings. That is before a single bill has been paid from it. Because in the Yukon, the bills barely exist. Housing is provided on site. Meals are covered. There is nowhere nearby to spend money even if someone wanted to. The remote nature of the work, which makes it so physically demanding, simultaneously eliminates almost every daily expense that would normally eat into a wage. The money accumulates almost untouched. For skilled operators and experienced crew members, the figures climb considerably higher. Foremen and specialist workers earn somewhere between $80,000 and $150,000 across the same season, again with most of that income available to be saved directly. The physical cost is real. Nobody walks off a Klondike mining claim at the end of a season without having paid for those earnings in full with their body and their time. But the financial reward waiting on the other side is one that very few industries can match. And remarkably, the mining wages were not even the most significant income stream flowing through the operation, not by a long way. The perks that make mining profitable. There is a version of the Klondike story that stops at the hourly wage and calls it a day. $65,000 for 6 months of hard labor. Impressive, certainly, but not the kind of number that changes a life overnight. That version of the story, however, is missing something important. It is missing the part where almost none of that money gets spent before it reaches the bank. Remote work has a financial quality that is almost impossible to replicate in a conventional employment setting. When a miner arrives in the Yukon at the start of a season, they step into an environment where the normal machinery of daily spending simply does not exist. There are no rent payments to make. There are no grocery runs, no utility bills, no fuel costs for a daily commute. The operation provides accommodation directly on site, basic, functional, and entirely free. 3 meals a day are covered by the camp, prepared and served, regardless of what the gold totals look like that week. What this creates, almost by accident, is a forced savings environment unlike anything available in ordinary working life. A miner earning $65,000 across a season, spending virtually nothing along the way, arrives at the end of those 6 months with a sum of money that would have taken years to accumulate in a city job after rent, food, and the general cost of living had taken their share. The stories that come out of the Klondike mining community reflect this reality directly. Workers who return season after season speak openly about using their earnings to clear debt, buy vehicles outright, or put deposits on properties. For many of them, a single season in the Yukon delivered a financial foundation that would otherwise have taken a decade of ordinary employment to build. Skilled workers earning toward the higher end of the wage range, foremen and experienced operators pulling in over $100,000 across the season, can leave the Yukon in a genuinely transformed financial position, all within the span of half a year. The work breaks the body, but for those who can endure it, the Klondike rewards that endurance in ways that extend far beyond the gold in the ground, and for the biggest names in the operation, there was an entirely separate income stream that most viewers watching at home never stopped to consider. The secret income stream most fans miss. There is a question worth sitting with for a moment. If a gold mining season produces $18 million worth of metal from the ground, where exactly does the money go? Equipment costs, fuel, payroll, land leases, the expenses of running a large-scale mining operation are enormous, and they consume a significant portion of every ounce pulled from the earth. What remains after costs is meaningful, but it tells only part of the financial story surrounding an operation like Parker Schnabel's. The part that most viewers miss entirely is sitting right in front of them every time they press play on a new episode. Gold Rush, the Discovery Channel series that built Parker's public profile and turned the Klondike into appointment television for millions of households, is not simply a camera crew following miners around for documentary purposes. It is a commercial entertainment product generating substantial revenue of its own, and the people at the center of it are not just miners, they are television personalities with all the financial leverage that status brings. The distinction matters enormously. A miner's income is tied directly to what the ground produces. A good season means strong returns. A difficult season, like the one Parker's crew had just come through, compresses those returns considerably. The risks are real. The variables are largely uncontrollable, and the financial outcome is never guaranteed until the final weigh-in. Television income operates on an entirely different logic. Episodes are commissioned in advance. Production schedules are set. The cameras roll whether the gold is flowing or the season is grinding to a halt against frozen ground. From a purely financial standpoint, a struggling season on the claim can actually make for compelling television, and compelling television keeps the cameras coming back, regardless of what the scale reads at the end of the year. This is the safety net that exists beneath the entire operation, largely invisible to the audience watching the drama of missed targets and broken equipment unfold on screen. The gold is the story, but the television show is, in many ways, the business. And the numbers attached to that business are considerably more stable than anything the Klondike ground can promise. How much the TV show really pays. When Gold Rush first aired, it introduced the world to a group of ordinary people attempting something genuinely difficult in one of the most remote corners of North America. The raw, unglamorous nature of the show was a large part of its appeal. These were not polished television personalities, they were miners, and the cameras were simply watching them work. That framing, however accurate it may have been in the early seasons, had evolved considerably by the time Parker Schnabel became the face of the franchise. What had started as a documentary experiment had grown into one of Discovery Channel's most reliable properties, pulling in millions of viewers per episode across multiple countries and generating the kind of consistent ratings that networks build long-term schedules around. When a television show reaches that level of commercial value, the people at its center begin to be compensated accordingly. Industry estimates place Parker Schnabel's per-episode earnings somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. A standard season runs to approximately 20 episodes, which means the television side of the operation alone can deliver somewhere in the region of $500,000 to $600,000 in a single year, guaranteed, regardless of how many ounces of gold end up on the scale at the season's end. For supporting cast members and experienced crew who appear regularly on screen, the figures are lower but still significant. Regular on-camera crew members are estimated to earn somewhere around $10,000 per episode. Across a full season, that represents an income stream that comfortably rivals, and in some cases exceeds, what the same person would earn purely from their mining wages. The combined effect of these two income sources, mining wages and television fees, fundamentally changes the financial reality for everyone involved in the production. A season that falls short of its gold target is not simply a disappointment softened by decent hourly rates. It is a season where a substantial, pre-agreed television income was flowing in the background the entire time, providing a financial floor that the gold itself could never reliably guarantee. For Parker specifically, television income was just one component of a financial picture that had grown far more complex than a simple mining operation, and the full scale of what he had built was genuinely remarkable. Building a multi-million-dollar empire. Parker Schnabel did not set out to become a brand. He set out to mine gold, the same way his grandfather John Schnabel had done before him on the same Alaskan land that first introduced the family to the industry. The ambition was always present, the competitive instinct always visible, but the empire that eventually grew around those qualities was something that took shape gradually, built from one successful season layered on top of another. The foundation was always the mining operation itself. Parker took control of his family's claim at an age when most people his age were still figuring out entry-level employment, and he scaled it aggressively. Better equipment, larger crews, more ambitious targets, each season represented a deliberate push beyond what the previous one had achieved. The gold production numbers reflected that trajectory, and so did the reputation that came with them. Television amplified everything. Gold Rush gave Parker a platform that no amount of successful mining could have created on its own, turning a skilled operator working in a remote corner of the Yukon into a recognizable figure across millions of households. That visibility opened doors that exist well outside the mining industry: sponsorship arrangements with equipment manufacturers, merchandise built around his name and the show's following, and the kind of durable public profile that continues generating value long after any individual season has ended. Before reaching 30 years of age, Parker had assembled a personal fortune estimated at over $10 million. That figure draws from multiple directions simultaneously: mining profits in strong seasons, television fees across years of consistent on-camera presence, and the broader commercial opportunities that follow someone who has become genuinely famous within their field. What makes the story unusual is the authenticity sitting underneath it. Parker did not arrive in the Yukon as a television concept looking for a setting. He arrived as someone who actually knew how to mine gold, and the success that followed was built on that foundation. The wealth was real, the work behind it was real, but holding all of it together came with a level of financial risk that most people watching from their living rooms never fully appreciated. The risk behind the fortune. There is a version of Parker Schnabel's story that is easy to look at from the outside and misread completely. The television fame, the gold totals, the estimated net worth, taken together, they paint a picture of someone insulated from real consequences, operating inside a system where the rewards are high and the downside is manageable. That version of the story is not accurate. Running a large-scale gold mining operation is one of the most capital-intensive pursuits in any extractive industry. Before a single ounce of gold is recovered from the ground, the costs have already been climbing for months. Heavy excavators capable of tearing through Klondike permafrost do not come cheap, and neither does keeping them running across a full season of punishment. Fuel consumption across an active mining operation runs into figures that would be difficult to comprehend without seeing the machinery in person. Repair bills arrive constantly, without warning, and without any regard for how the gold totals are tracking at that point in the season. Then there is payroll. Dozens of crew members earning strong wages across a 6-month season represent a commitment that does not flex when the ground turns difficult. The crew gets paid whether the wash plant is running at full capacity or sitting idle while a critical component gets sourced and fitted. Land lease agreements add another fixed layer of cost, binding the operation to financial obligations that exist entirely independent of what the earth decides to produce. Parker carries the weight of all of it. When the season ends well, the profits flow back through the operation, and the risk feels retrospectively manageable. When the season falls short, as this one did against its original targets, the gap between revenue and expenditure narrows in ways that concentrate entirely on the person at the top. The crew collects their wages and returns home. The owner absorbs whatever the final accounting produces. A genuinely catastrophic season, one where equipment failures, bad ground, and poor gold recovery aligned across the same months, could theoretically erase not just the season's profits, but a significant portion of everything built before it. The fortune is real, but so is the exposure sitting directly beneath it, and Parker carries both every single season he returns to the Klondike. The future of the gold rush. Seasons end in the Klondike, but the machinery that surrounds them keeps turning. When the wash plant shuts down and the crew disperses at the close of another year in the Yukon, the financial ecosystem that has built up around Parker Schnabel's operation does not go into hibernation alongside the frozen ground. Sponsorship conversations continue. Production companies begin planning the next television season. The brand that has grown steadily around Parker's name keeps generating value through the quieter months in ways that purely extractive businesses simply cannot.
Good ground makes everything else just a minor detail. I will mine in
735, 741. That durability is what separates a mining empire from a mining operation. A straightforward mining business lives and dies by what the ground produces. A bad season means a bad year, full stop. What Parker has built over the course of his career introduces enough parallel income streams that a difficult result at the final weigh-in, while genuinely painful, does not threaten the entire structure. Mining profits, television fees, equipment sponsorships, and merchandise revenue move at different rhythms and respond to different pressures, and that variety provides a resilience that gold alone could never deliver. It also explains something that casual viewers of Gold Rush sometimes find puzzling: why the crew keeps coming back, season after season, through the broken equipment and the brutal hours and the seasons that fall well short of their targets. The answer is not simply loyalty or stubbornness, although both of those qualities are present in abundance across Parker's team. The answer is that the full financial picture, taken together, continues to make sense even when the gold does not cooperate. The Klondike has been producing gold for well over a century, and the ground still holds enormous quantities waiting to be reached by the right equipment in the right conditions. Parker's operation is positioned to keep pursuing it for as long as the economics hold and the audience keeps watching. What started as a family tradition in the Alaskan wilderness became a television phenomenon, and then something larger still, a genuine entertainment and mining enterprise with staying power that extends far beyond any single season. The gold brought people to the Yukon, but it is the empire built around it that will keep them there. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below, like this video, and subscribe for more incredible stories just like this one.